Hello, everybody. Could I kindly ask you to take your seats? I know it's a nice moment to say hello to all of our colleagues and friends, but I hope we'll have lots of time to do that during the week. I'm just a little bit worried. My staff put 10 minutes for opening remarks, and I think they were hoping that we would start 10 minutes late so that I don't talk so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Stefan Schweinfest, the director of the UN Statistics Division, and I must tell you, this never gets old. I've been sitting here a long time, and it's every time a wonderful moment, an emotional moment on our Friday morning to start the whole commission week. So welcome to each and every one of you. I'm glad you all made it here, and I hope there will be many more during the week. So you know this Friday seminar is a bit sort of, we call it the antechamber, the ouverture, the warm-up session, the appetizer, the prologue. You pick your metaphor. And it is the seminar on emerging issues, so we want to think about innovative things. And today we have chosen the topic of data governance across systems, exploring strategies for official statistics. So we're going to look at the whole spectrum. Well, the first question is, what is data governance and what does it cover? And I'm sure we will hear a lot of different opinions and views of that. I think what we have tried to do is to take you on a journey here. And I said we will be zooming in. We are starting with sort of the broader perspectives in the morning, and we will land, I promise you, by the end of the day in this room, in conference room 4, and ask ourselves, so what does this all have to do with the Statistical Commission? So that's a little bit the design of today. And we will look, at the interplay between official statistics and the broader data ecosystems. And I always like this sentence, never gets old. There are lots of challenges, but of course there are also lots of opportunities. And I must say my staff wrote me a wonderful speech, but I have a terrible record in reading speeches. But there is one sentence in there that I really don't want to miss because it's beautiful. It says, we gather not only as statisticians here, but as pioneers at the forefront of navigating this complex terrain. So that's what we are doing this morning, and I really like that. Data governance, there are many aspects to it, public, private, national, regional, global. We will look at all of that. A context is also the change of our terms of references for the Statistical Commission, because as you may recall, 2 years ago, we broadened the scope of the Statistical Commission to not only look at official statistics, but to become the data commission of the United Nations system. But now we have to fill those words with deeds and ambition. What does that really mean? And I think this seminar is also for me a way of doing it. So I promise you we will be zooming in. In the morning, we will look at the governance dimension. So we have a couple of speakers, and we will listen a little bit to others, not the usual suspects. So we get voices from outside our system. Including in the second morning session, voices from the private sector, because sometimes we have to admit the private sector may be smarter and faster to recognize the value of data, that data is an asset. We are concretely discussing that topic, actually, when we talk about the S&A review. And we should listen a little bit to them, how they organize themselves. So then in the afternoon, we will come back to the official statistics, and we will look at ourselves. How do we do that? We travel a little bit across the world. We have voices from different parts of the world, and they have done work on data governance, and we want to build on that. There are different countries out there. Some are centralized, some are more decentralized. There are different data cultures. There are different legal systems, and we will listen a little bit to all of that. And then in the afternoon, I promised you at the end of the day, we will land in conference room 4 here and ask ourselves the question, what do we do with all of this as official statistical community? What is the role of the Statistical Commission? How can the Statistical Commission, which is normally doing normative work, traveling from good practices to best practices to recommendations to international standards, what can the Statistical Commission do that is helpful for countries out there? We have data governance implicitly on our agenda, not explicitly, and we can reflect. And if you have any ideas of how we do that in the future, the elements of data governance, like organization of management, legal systems, the quality framework, quality assurance framework, big data, et cetera, all of those are bits and pieces of the data governance agenda. But perhaps we can do better in the future and reflect on how we deal with this. So I'm looking forward to your ideas and your inputs. I thank everybody. I thank you for being here, coming early. I thank the dream team that we have. Anil, Angelique, and Rachel will lead us to the various sections of the discussion, and we have excellent speakers. I want to say thank you to my own team that has worked very hard putting that together, in particular Linda and Matthias. And now I can just say, enjoy the day and welcome in New York. And I hand over to Anil, who will lead us through the first session. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Stefan. Welcome, colleagues. It's great to be with all of you. So we are going to poke into data governance across systems, and we're going to explore some of the strategies for official statistics. So I hope you're in the right session, first of all. So I just want to make sure. What is data governance? In a sense, data governance is really the rules, the laws, the policies, the guidelines, standards, procedures, and the practices that we use to regulate our business, the generation, management, the use, reuse, and providing access to data, statistics, insights. And I would say, just if you were to kind of step back a bit and look at our environment as statistical organizations, I'd say for most part of our history, we've controlled that game. So we, in the case of national statistical organizations, we've had a law, and that law has helped us govern how we go about collecting information from citizens or organizations, businesses, and then how we go about using it to create insights, to create data, to create outputs, to create official statistics. And for most of that part, people have left us alone and said, you do a good job, keep doing it. It's great. And so governance was an internal game, I would say. Well, you look at society and how it's evolved, and especially so in the last little while with, some of the advent of technology, different data sources, and if you see what's happening in the private sector with massive, major digital players, citizens now care about what happens to their data. And there are, I think, some very open questions about, how did we as societies find ourselves where we are today? Some have almost made the argument that this has been an illegal farming of our data about citizens, and that governance around that has been lacking and absent. And I would say that national statistical organizations, in some cases, have kind of become part of that narrative a little bit. And so what we used to do for, hundreds of years in some cases, or decades, well, all of a sudden citizens care about, well, what are you doing? How are you differentiating? What is the governance around my data when you go about doing your business as national statistical organizations. So that's the first thing I just wanted to kind of lead you to, is that if it wasn't important before, well, it is absolutely critical today. And if we are to have the trust of citizens, if we are to even have the trust of consumers of our outputs, governance matters. And it's not just governance on a piece of paper in the dark halls or some mission vision statement, but it matters at every level. How is it that we acquire the data, how we compile it, how we go about processing it, and how we go about disseminating it. And so now we have to be far more transparent if we are to have the trust at every stage of the way. Look around today. I mean, in an unstable world, you look at climate change, you look at technology. Some of these things have very little respect for borders. What happens in what we just went through, the pandemic, in one part of the world very quickly becomes our problem or our challenge. And those events, in a sense, in terms of polycrises, as some have called it, no longer respect the governance, if you like, of one entity or one NSO or one nation. Now all of a sudden, we're looking at governance at not just at the national level, we're looking at it now at the supranational, we're looking at it at the international level. And all of a sudden, the classifications, the standards, the rules by which we do our business is now intricately tied to how it manifests itself at that international level. So if we were isolated before in what we did as a national statistical organization or as an organization, now all of a sudden if you do something and it isn't harmonized or it isn't connected, you're going to find yourself completely irrelevant or struggling to provide meaning as to what we put out and how it relates or compares to another region, another nation, another on some of these massive issues of global supply chains to, as I said, climate change, security, our health, and so on. So in a sense, governance cares about borders, but it equally also doesn't care about borders, if you know what I mean. And so, which means that organizations like ours have to work even harder to make meaning, have the trust of global citizens, and how it is that we go about operating. And so that is really the topic of today's session. And I think we are absolutely fortunate to have an incredible lineup of speakers. So I'm going to just go to my right and ask each of our distinguished speakers to very briefly introduce themselves to you, take about 5-7 minutes to give you their sense of what they are doing in this field of governance, to bring their perspectives, to tease out some of these issues, maybe even give you some examples of how it is that they're pursuing this very rapidly changing field, and obviously try to make links to what we do as national statistical organizations. And then after that, I'm going to just ask each of them a question so that they can tease out a particular aspect. And then in the remaining 20 minutes or so, we'll turn to you and try and get your questions. So that's the order. That's a little bit of the framing of this session. And so now it is my absolute pleasure to start off with Dilek Freisel from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and to give us a sense of citizen-generated data and how that fits into the overall notion of governance. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Anno, and thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Dilek Freisel. I'm a research scholar at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, IASA, that is based in Austria. I'm also the managing director of the newly established Citizen Science Global Partnership. And it's a network that aims to advance citizen science for a sustainable world. and I'm also working at the UNDP Oslo Governance Center on a particular project related to citizen science. So to today's discussion, I was asked to bring citizen science and citizen perspective, but I would like to, before I answer the broader question of data governance frameworks, I would like to start with explaining what citizen science is, because I'm sure there are many of you here who are not maybe familiar of this term. Maybe you may have heard of citizen-generated data or crowdsourcing or community-based monitoring or volunteer geographic information, or I can go on. But the way I use citizen science is as an umbrella term to describe diverse practices, methodologies, the ways of working with the public to produce knowledge. And I will briefly define it and broadly define it as public participation in scientific research and knowledge production activities. And I'm using this terminology in a very, very inclusive way. Even though I come from the background of academia, I also work with civil society organizations a lot. And when we talk about citizen science, we're talking about bottom-up practices that are led by civil society organizations or citizens and communities themselves to address an issue that is a matter of concern to them. But we're also talking about global level or regional level or even local level scientific projects that are addressing a particular topic, again, to address a scientific research question that also has direct relevance to sustainable development most of the time. So the reason why there are so many different terms is because they all come into existence in different environments, in different fields, and they all reflect the peculiarities of the area and the field they come from. So in my world, science, citizen science is used more because I represent academia more, and then in this world or in civil society organizations, the term citizen-generated data is more common. So after this brief introduction, I'm not going to tell you what data governance framework is because I don't know what it is. I actually became more familiar with the term for the first time after I was invited to this session, I must admit. But then I started to read a lot about the work of the chief statisticians, and Angela and other colleagues have been working on to build this global data governance. And then I read a little bit more about that, and I really saw that citizen science has to be part of it and is part of it. The way it is part of it is because colleagues came up with this idea of principles-based approach to data governance framework, a global data governance framework. I really liked the way that they approach this from a principles perspective, because all these principles and the objectives of these overarching objectives of these principles have direct relevance to citizen science. So for instance, when they talk about principles, they talk about values. And value means actually the value of data. And by making it open and by allowing it to be used and reused. And this is very important in citizen science initiatives, because open data means allowing the reuse of data. And we're talking about open science practices in the scientific community. And there is the trust aspect. I know that we're talking about probably more trust in data quality in this perspective of global data governance, but we're actually also talking about trust between diverse sectors, diverse stakeholders and actors who are involved in it. And citizen science is actually the way that could bring in these diverse actors and stakeholders together to talk to each other. It's broader than this national statistical offices or the UN system. It involves citizens, that you need citizens you need citizens to trust the way that you're implementing your operations. And also academia, also civil society organizations. That's why it's really important. And citizen science actually really serves this narrative. And then the other one is equity. So you can only achieve equity if you are involving all diverse partners in the process. And when you're trying to make sure that actually I would even put it under the umbrella of ethics, when you're making sure of the fact that everybody, all the individuals, even the vulnerable groups and hardest to reach populations are actually counted on data, and they are part of this global data governance framework or the data governance frameworks, whichever scale it is. You're making it fair and equitable. So I really appreciate the references in this data governance framework that are made to humanitarian-based approach to data, fair data principles, care data principles that we're all signed up to within the citizen science community. And I actually even bring in the new initiative of the UN Statistics Division, which is the Citizen Data Collaborative, which also works on building principles for citizen data, regardless of civil society-led, communities-led, or academia-led, or governments-led. So, cut a long story short, I think citizen science approaches are really grounded on the same principles as the data governance framework principles, and I'm sure my colleagues are going to be doing a great job explaining what exactly they mean by this data governance framework, and trust is at the heart of it. Partnerships, building trust, and you can achieve that through citizen science approaches, methodologies, and data. And by integrating citizen science approaches explicitly in these frameworks, global data framework or other data frameworks, you're actually ticking all the boxes related to these principles. But you need to do it in explicitly and in a meaningful way by really bringing those actors into the picture. I will just stop here, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dilek. So just to add a couple of points, and then turning to our next speaker. First is that there's a whole notion of principles that are now underlining this governance structure, which now gets a little bit fuzzier, if you know what I mean, when we start to bring in elements of ethics and values. And yet they're very, very, I would say, they're almost primordial in our way in which we go forward. And we're, as I was saying earlier, we're no longer insular. We are dependent on others. It's a team sport. We're dependent upon data from external sources, and at the same time, it's a full contact sport because now we're butting up against other interests and organizations with their own mandates, with their own areas to support. So this notion of we put out statistics to we actually facilitate good governance across a system, this is a whole pivot to data stewardship, and that is a responsibility and an accountability that I would say most NSOs are not intimately familiar with. And now it's about if people don't see themselves in both the data and the governance, well, guess what? We suffer the same fate as many other organizations who are then accused of being irresponsible. So inclusion and equity and disaggregation, along with our statistical methods of privacy protection, residual disclosure, all those things become absolutely crucial. So thank you for that, Dilek, and we'll probe into some of these a little bit more. Next, it's my pleasure to pass on the floor to Paul Schreier, who is the Chief Statistician of the OECD. Paul.
Thank you, Anil, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure being here. As Anil said, I'm the Chief Statistician at the OECD. I'm also the head of the Directorate for Statistics and Data, and I'm mentioning this because, in a way, I'm dealing with a little data governance internally to the OECD, and it may be a microcosmos, but actually there's a lot of parallels to the bigger picture that we are discussing here. I'm also mentioning it because the OECD has been looking at data governance not only from the perspective of a statistician, but really from a policy perspective. And there are different groups and committees in the organization who have been looking at data governance. On the one hand, those who come from a central government perspective, sort of people who work in prime minister's offices and who think about data governance in a broad sense. And on the other hand, colleagues from the science, technology, innovation area who think about data governance more from a technical side or from a digitalization side. So I've talked to my colleagues before coming here and said, so what do you think are the key challenges and opportunities that we are facing in this area? And I've got a long list, but I've tried to summarize this in a few points that I want to share right now. The first, and sort of, I mean, it may sound a little trivial, but the general big challenge is, of course, for everyone, no matter what your perspective, is to strike a balance between ensuring the utility of data use for analysis, for information, for transformative capacity in businesses on the one hand, and on the other hand, protecting privacy, confidentiality, inclusivity, transparency. And this is, I mean, striking a balance is a sort of a mild way of expressing the many legal, ethical complexities that arise in this context. And depending a little bit from which angle you look at it, you will take a different stance on this or attach different weights to one or the other of these things, but everyone is facing that trade-off. The second point is something that comes in particular from our colleagues on the science and technology side. They say a key issue these days is thinking about cross-border data flows and their governance. Okay, and there is more and more data that is that is crossing borders. When there are national data governance systems, they do not always speak to each other. They are not necessarily compatible. There's a big policy issue in how do we go about ensuring those things, privacy, data protection, usability of data in an international context. And the third challenge that has come through is really thinking about the capacity of all the stakeholders to effectively manage and use data responsibly along the value chain. Okay, so this is not only about the professional statistician. It goes all the way from the businesses who generate data to the citizens, where there may be issues of data literacy and usability of data. And so it's a pretty complex issue, and it has to do with a lot of policy domains. The opportunities are quite obvious. I mean, the access to new data and the possibility to leverage new sources, not only for official statistics, but for the whole data system are quite clear. And I mean, we have been witnessing this power of data over the last years, and I'm not going to remind you of all the things that we've been able to do during COVID, which would have been impossible hadn't we had the power of the digital transformation with us. And there's also a lot of things happening on the technology side, which on the one hand may pose a problem, may provide a source, but is also part of the solution to some of the privacy issues. For example, privacy-enhancing technologies are increasingly relevant. I'm thinking of synthetic data or new methods of encrypting data and homomorphic encryption that actually help us dealing with the trade-off between privacy and usability of data. So there's a whole bunch of issues that come through, depending on the policy angle that you take, but it's a truly exciting and dynamic period that we're looking at.
Thank you very much, Paul. Just to pick up on a couple of points again, I would say, for the most part in our history as NSOs, we used to say, here's the data, package it, hand it over to the policymaker, and say, over to you, good luck. Well, as you know, we're now shining light on certain aspects with disaggregation and certain regional disparities and so on. And so you kind of have to step back and say, wait, I get to decide, or the statistical agency gets to decide, or the NSO gets to decide where we're shining the light. So are we truly independent and neutral in this process? So I just leave that as an open question. The second is this notion of balancing and the trade-offs that Paul talked about. Again, we're making those value judgments in the governance as to how much and where. There's a science behind it. There's certain frameworks that we use, which continues to evolve as well. But I would say some of those trade-offs are in a context. A context may allow for a trade-off, flash estimates or whatever, and maybe there's another context which may say, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing those things. So again, in terms of the overall governance structure, how are we geared to make some of those trade-offs? I think the whole notion of responsibility in the past, if we could, we did. Well, now we're asking our questions about if we can, should we? And so those ethical questions are now starting to raise their heads, and we're not all working at the same speed, but we're all connected. So again, those are some of the challenges that Paul is raising, and technology. The whole notion of machine learning and artificial intelligence are opening up all sorts of possibilities, both on responsible use, but also, unfortunately, on irresponsible use. So again, I think we have to be very, very mindful of technology as an asset, but technology as also a bit of a threat in this whole notion. So it comes back to, again, what Dilek said, which is that trust factor of citizens globally in how it is that we're going about. So not going there isn't an option. Going there has all sorts of interesting challenges and trade-offs, and governance, I think, is going to play a very key role. So thanks for that, Paul. So I'm going to turn next to Vincenzo Acquera, who is from the UNDESA Division of Public Institutions and Digital Governance. So over to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'm really, really very impressed to see so crowded side event. I would really love to have a side event like this. So really congratulations to my colleagues here for organizing this very important meeting. Let me just quickly introduce myself so you understand why also I'm sitting here. I am the Chief of Digital Government Branch. So what we do in DESA, in the Division of Public Institutions and Digital Government, is we look more on what we called, and we still are calling, e-government, because we are the one that we are producing this e-government survey. We started in 2021 and 01, and it's about 20 years that we published this report. And we also collect the data and we do analysis based on our indicator that is the e-government development index. And we also thanks a lot to our colleagues from statistic divisions that always support us on the preparation of the report. And we are also, we observed the evolution of the e-government and digital government during these years. And we really see now that what is going on is that the digital government is more data-driven, and data-centric. So the core issue of discussion today that is about the data governance and data governance framework becomes also fundamental to understand and also to support member states in developing on digital government. And also I see a lot of convergence between the different skills, competencies, expertise. Before was much more easy to identify what is your job, I'm an engineer as a background, but I really see that now it's very difficult even to define exactly which kind of expertise we have in terms of what we do. And this is also because what we have been observing is that, and I do believe that in terms of data governance, And there is a similarity on the evolution of data governance with the digital government. I will explain more on this. This is because both the two areas are strongly affected and have to respond to this technological advancement and also these societal changes that we are facing. And I will just mention some of those because I do believe that these are part also that are very important to discuss when we want to look forward for a more effective framework on data governance. So the first one indeed is the integration of cloud-based solutions. So moving on cloud changed completely what was in the past. Normally, we used to have institutions that work in silos. They have their own systems, and even there was very difficult even to share information because even for different standards, different quality, and also different policies among institutions. But the cloud technology changed completely this. No matter if we are going on commercial cloud, hybrid solution, or even a private one. Then we have this real-time data issue. There is a more request of different kind of data, big data, and real-time or almost real-time data. This also completely changed and shift towards a real data governance, enabling organization to make decisions based on the most current and accurate data available, and means for digital government provide services that are based on those data. And here other similarities. Then also decentralization of data governance models. As I said before, we used to see centralized. Now there are different models of data governance, and these decentralized models encourage collaboration across different institutions, functions, and also fostering innovation and growth. And then what we already said is about the data privacy and compliance. With the emergence of new regulation, there is a growing focus on data privacy and compliance, and data governance frameworks are adapting to ensure and adhere to these regulations and protect sensitive information. And this also brings me on data ethics and security, that there is we really look at this data ethics, security and privacy to ensure responsible and compliant use of data. And last, I think also is data democratization. There is an increased focus on providing self-service tools and democratizing data to enable non-technical users to access, analyze, and visualize data without specialized skills. So these main trends affected indeed the data governance framework, but at the same time affected the way digital government have been developed and the way that we need really to look more on what we call even we used to say all of government approach, but now is more all of society's approach. So, and this also include the strategic importance to rethink and redesign a data governance framework, taking consideration all these changes. So this is why in 2020, in our report, the government survey, this one, it's available online, we came with, I think it was under your leadership. So I have to, I think really Stefan was one that was supporting and pushing us to do that. We came with a new model for a data governance framework. So I think I will have time to explain a little bit more when will be my turn. I stop here, and thank you so much.
Excellent, Vincenzo. Thank you again for highlighting a number of points, this whole notion of skills and capacity. And so governance requires not just a playbook, but if people don't have the skills, that's going to become a real challenge. This interplay between digital and data, and really us as statistical agencies and organizations have to be so mindful of the technical infrastructure and its governance, and as you said, whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, whether it's cloud-based systems, hybrid systems. I mean, these are all systems that now raise the bar in terms of governance as well. The whole notion of frameworks and laws in one part of the world, like GDPR. Well, guess what? They're not isolated anymore. Other countries are looking at, well, if we want to play in that international arena, how are we compliant with it, or at least in principles, and this whole notion of democratization of data as well. So thank you, Vincenzo, with that. Last but certainly not least, Angela, I will just turn it right to you to just again kick us off.
Thank you. So my name is Angela Mayer. I'm the head of a research program at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, where when we talk about transnational data, I mean, everything we do, the knowledge that we produce on drugs and crime is by definition bringing together data. But the reason I'm speaking, I'm actually because I have been co-chairing with Steve McFeely from WHO a working group that feeds into the work of the Chief Executive Board of the United Nations. The Chief Executive Board is our highest internal governance, is chaired by the Secretary General, where all the heads of organization meet and discuss very important things. And within that framework and the different work stream that prepare for that work, we have been chairing a group of 27 UN system agencies to really reflect on international data governance. And really to say, what, as a UN system, how can we support countries to manage this challenging but also important topic. And so what we have done is that we have developed, we have a concept paper that is public, has been approved by the Chief Executive Board. And I want to tell you, all the spoke before me explain why. So I don't have to explain to you why we have done this. But I wanted to tell you the mission that we came out in a sentence. But I want to read it because every word reflects some of the elements that came out. And so the mission that we said we wanted to promote a multi-stakeholder approach to data governance that responsibly unlocks the full value of data for all, with accountability and agility. So each word includes all of this. So where is the challenges that we have in achieving this? Well, the challenge is, one of the biggest challenges, fragmentation. And as many of you have explained, there are a lot of communities that are working around these issues. So the statistical community is just one, and it brings one perspective. And so from one side, looking at privacy, in others, there are localized policies that have been developed. Even I think in the United States, there are a lot of states that have started to look before, looking at federal level. There is the digital policy that was mentioned, the intellectual property angle, the trade angle. I mean, WTO is regulating data flows only from an economic perspective. And so the challenge is that if all of this stream goes along, then we lose part of this. If data flows are regulated only for economic purposes, then we forget the benefits that we promise individuals to get, that the benefits that we promise that we want to have all countries equal access to the benefits of data, for example. The fragmentation is also very much geographic. UNCTAD has done an analysis of data governance policies around the world. And we can divide into three typology with a lot of grays within. But, there is the east of the world that basically see data pretty much as owned by government. There is Europe, Latin America, where sees data owned by individuals. And then there is the North America, where basically data is owned by private sector. And so this, we spoke about in our work as a tectonic plates. And so the big question is, are these tectonic plates reconcilable? So should we talk about interoperability or actually reconciliation of different policies? But how to overcome these challenges? And one of the things that we really have focused a lot is to say we need to provide incentives to all of these fragmented communities, policies that are emerging to really converge. So defining principle, as Dilek mentioned, we have been now working, after we have done like a kind of a mission statement and digested where we want to go, we are now working in developing principles that, again, hopefully can be helpful to member states to adopt in any form that they think fit, around this, the three things that Dilek said: trust, value, and equity, or fairness. And maybe Steve will elaborate more on all of this, but around this, basically all of these elements of accessibility, interoperability, transparency, quality, etc. Fits. And the most important is that we can do this only through a multi-stakeholder approach. We can't, governments alone will not be able to really put all of this together. And so I want to leave with a question on, on all of this. Has Genie is already out of the lamp? Or so is it, can we put it back? Or is now out and it will be difficult, or if we want to put it back, how? Is it already too late, or there is something that we can do? Over.
Thank you very much, Angela. So many points there, I think, colleagues, for us to reflect upon. First of all, that we're not an island. We're connected, and the kind of work that you're doing, bringing different organizations and agencies together, tries to at least prevent some of that fragmentation and try to get some sort of a uniform perspective, but knowing that, we are federated in many of our own areas and jurisdictions. So we have to reconcile these kinds of things. And data in itself is governed not just by us, but by international rules and organizations. And we butt up against those. So we have to be extremely mindful. This notion of this promise, right? The access as well as the protections that we provide. The notion of these tectonic shifts that are happening, and knowing that, we may be able to influence some of these things, but we have to play an activist role and be at those tables. We can't just be passive and be takers of these things. So how are we actually poised to play a part, an active part, in the governance system as it evolves? Because I don't think you can put the genie back in the proverbial bottle. So it is about choices. It's about these balances that we've talked about, and coming back to the fundamental notion of trust, value, and fairness that we've talked about. So as you can see, colleagues, an incredible panel with a lot of experience. I wondered, Stefan, if you wanted to just jump in at this stage, or should I go to? Okay, perfect. So as promised, I'm going to ask each of them a little question to kind of dig a little bit deeper, and then I want you to get ready to ask them questions as well. So I'll go in reverse order, if you'll allow. So Angela, given your significant role that you're playing on the HLCP and the CEB's efforts, how do you navigate the complexities of aligning these diverse data governance policies and practices? What are, from your experience, the main challenges of achieving consensus on this global data governance standards among diverse stakeholders, and how can they be overcome?
Thank you. So some of the challenges, as we discussed before, is this fragmentation, is the silos, but there is also a political challenges, and some are related to the multilateral, if you want, crisis that we have, and we see the divide, the polarization, And so this gets into the same, you know, when bringing member states together in agreeing on something so, as I said, touchy, but it can be, you know, for different states. So this, of course, doesn't help when we are eroding, in a way, the common ideas that we had, that we can all lose a little bit in order to gain a bigger good. Now, states more and more don't want to lose anything. And so, and the same is in realm of data. And we can also discuss about statistics. If I may, you know, I'll bring at the end an example also of how maybe statistics, a National Statistical Office, can help us to regain this idea. And so some of these issues are very much at the core of political discourse of controlling data. I wanted to give you an example. 2 weeks ago, member states were here in New York discussing a new cybercrime convention. According to the plan, 2 weeks ago, they were supposed to conclude, to celebrate. They have agreed on a new convention. But actually, they went home with no agreement. And one of the main sticky points is the exchange of real data, or real data. Why? Because some member states see this as, you know, an opportunity to force private sector or other multi-stakeholders to give data to state in order to, you know, in the name of security. On the other side, you have the privacy, the issue of, you know, protecting data that go against. And so that is the collision that you see. And so that is definitely a political angle. And then, but I wanted to say maybe what the statistical community, and then, well, first of all, it would be important. This day, I hope, is also a day where hopefully we can learn. And it would be great to hear from you. What would you like to have from the UN system coming out that can help you? As a commission, but also as a National Statistical Office, to come up front on this issue of data governance. And so I wanted to just to conclude by saying what the role of the NSO or the Statistical Commission could be on this. And first of all is maybe to, bring back the spirit of multilateralism and international cooperation in statistics, and think about what is the international data international statistical governance that we have. Because I think we do have a lot as a community, but I'm not sure that we have for example, I was looking, and maybe Stefano will correct me, I thought, do we have, I could not find it, a commitment by member states to provide data to international organizations, being the SDG, for example, that meet impartiality, quality. There is a commitment of National Statistical Office to a fundamental principle. There is the commitment of international organization, but where is the commitment where there is this flow? That member states contribute in a way, in the best good faith, to the international statistical real system of SDG, for example. And so that would be the first in statistics. But if the Commission also wanted to go beyond statistics and look at the data, I think there is a choice whether the Commission then goes into more policy issue, and then the policy issue are hard, and the policy discussion, or to stay at a technical level. At technical level, there is plenty of things that the Commission can go beyond the statistics and looking at the broader issue of data. So I leave it there.
As you can see, we're asking more questions than answering, which is usually the case of these kinds of things, which is good. So next, I'm going to go to you, Vincenzo. I think you described the UN playing a critical role in setting global standards for e-governance and data management. Would you be kind enough to elaborate on the key principles of data governance frameworks for e-government that are promoted by DESA, and how it supports member states in enhancing their digital governance capabilities?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. Now, I would just 1 second say first that I do believe the genius is already here. What we need to do is just to identify the right 3 wishes so we can move forward on that. Okay, so coming back on this data governance framework, as I said, we design and we elaborate in 2020. And after that, we have been working with many member states with capacity development activities on that. We started from the principles of the, of course, SDGs. Our division, our focal goal is the goal 16, although we know that when we talk about public institutions, and it's always cross-cutting also the others. So build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. That is our, let's say, basic to develop the framework. And so the principles are effectiveness, accountability, and inclusiveness. And then we structured the framework in four main layers. Starting from consideration that there is a systematic and multi-dimensional approach that we have to use. So data governance is a comprehensive approach that involves setting policies, establish leadership for institutional coordination, nurturing and enabling data ecosystems, and streamlining data management. Then also, we look at the four different pillars of data governance. So it's a dynamic relationship between policies, institutions, people, and processes, and enabling technologies. And if we look at the first and second pillars, highlight more the importance of legitimizing and institutionalizing policies and effective leaderships. The third pillar is more about the data ecosystems. We already talked a little bit about that reflect the relationship between data processes and public engagement. And this framework emphasizes the importance of creating an open and dynamic system where stakeholders interact to exchange, produce, and use data. And then the fourth one is about the adaptive application of technologies in supporting data use and governance. So these are the four pillars. And then the other layer is about data quality assurance and privacy protection. So it is imperative to ensure the privacy and security of personal data, adopt a whole-of-government approach to data governance, and build capacity to overcome data silos and skill gaps. And then the last one is about multi-stakeholder partnership. Also, this was mentioned by other panelists here. So government should build a data partnership with all stakeholders to leverage digital solutions driven by the private sector, promote the publication of data produced by civil society organizations, and open government data portals, and increase engagement of stakeholders through policy, institutional, and technical coordination. I'm not going more in detail on this. As I said, there is a full chapter on this on the Government Survey 2020, if you are more interested. What I would like just to add is, starting from this theoretical framework, we move on doing some capacity building activities with the different member states. This is because, based also on our assessment on the digital government, we realized that we can really identify the world that is split in two parts, in two big. Although, if we look at the report, there are four different clusters, but we can really see half of the countries that are moving even faster on digital transformation and digital government, and they are really working hard on this, no matter differences among countries. But there is half of the countries, especially countries in special situation and LDCs, that still are really lagging behind. So we identify under a trust fund, we are supporting member states in promoting and this data government framework. I can mention some countries that we are supporting. We are supporting Bangladesh, Bhutan, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Laos, PDR, Rwanda, and also others are coming soon, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Africa, so many in African region and in Asia. But what is I would like to share with you that maybe is more significant here is that when we organize this workshop, the most important thing that happened is when we are really able to put in one room all the different stakeholders. So we really work a lot in organizing the workshop in a way that we need to be sure that all the players are sitting in that room. And what is happening is something that sometimes still surprises us, because even if they come from the same government or from the same environment, same ecosystem, sometimes even they don't know each other, or even they do not realize, for example, they manage the same data, but they duplicate the data, they have even different standards to use the data. So, or they have the same challenges, or they really are trying to reinvent the wheels when others, they already have the solution. So the fact that we are really bringing all together, and we force them for 1 day, for 1 day and a half, to discuss, and also to be very open, to be, for the first time maybe for those countries, not to work in the silos. This also brings a lot of value, and create also this new way to work that for those countries is not really in theory, they always say that, but the reality is that there are still sometimes different institutions fighting not to release data, fighting not to provide information or sharing information. So this, I think, is the experience that I wanted to bring to the table today.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo. I'm going to turn straight to Paul. From the OECD's perspective, Paul, what are the key principles that should guide the development of data governance models? Which data governance instruments exist at the level of the OECD, and what could be the role of NSOs in data governance models?
Thank you, Anil. I'll start out just by taking a little step back again and asking ourselves, okay, we have all these governance models, but what is behind is a number of policy issues that are really that we're really concerned about. And I mentioned before, you have the idea of promoting research, science, technology. You want to promote competitiveness, but you may also want to promote competition. It's about transparency. It's about protecting privacy. Government efficiency is a big item. All these policy rationales seem to suggest that actually there may be different forms of data governance that we're looking at, and probably not a single one. And indeed, when you think about the myriad of data flows that are in these data systems, you quickly realize that there's probably more than one governance model around. Just think of, if you think of governance, data flows within government, well, I mean, this is eGov frameworks, then there are data flows between the citizens and business and government. Well, here we're in a different framework where you have privacy and data protection laws that come in. You have government and citizens with open data frameworks. You have data flows between businesses. Well, this is where competition law comes in, where competitiveness considerations come in, where big investment plans come in, and of course you have the business and government data sharing for public good. This is the issue that we've been discussing in terms of data access for NSOs. And you realize that nearly every data flow that we observe already has some sort of governance or law or structure around it. Okay, so I think the main takeaway for me is that probably we will not be ever looking at a single all-encompassing data governance framework that will deal with all the policy issues that we are addressing. But I think the challenge or the objective should be that the existing frameworks should be as much aligned as possible. At least around some principles. And some countries have actually started to looking at national data strategies that are targeted at those things. I mean, I'm thinking of Australia that has started reforming its data governance frameworks only a few years ago with a big sort of Data Availability and Transparency Act. And in Europe also, there's a European strategy for data. It all sort of tries to bring things under the same heading. And of course, there should at least be some common principles that these various forms of governance follow. And well, I mean, those are the things that we know. We want these governance models to be trustworthy. We want them to be sustainable. We want them to be accountable. We want them to be inclusive, reusable, standard compatible, and so on. So we need to rally around the need for common principles and common values, at least, that are behind these instruments. I'll just mention one of the governance instruments that exist at the OECD. It's called the OECD Recommendation on Enhancing Access and Sharing, Access to and Sharing of Data. That is sort of a soft law, but it's been endorsed by all of the OECD countries, and it deals with both the efficiency of government and the enhancement of data, mainly for research, science, technology, and business use. But again, behind it are common principles in terms of reinforcing trust, stimulating investment in data, and fostering sort of an effective use of the data asset. And we see it at the OECD as well. There are other recommendations or other forms of governance that are around. There's a health data government recommendation. There is a recommendation on digital government, and so on and so forth. So I think we're looking at I wouldn't say an ecosystem of governance models, but certainly not at a single all-encompassing framework.
I can't help but just intervene in there in saying that many of these models were either created in a very different era or are in flux in some sense to try and catch up to the era that we're in. And we find ourselves sometimes trying to explain how NSOs don't apply in some of those data flow restrictions and should not for the creation of public good, and a public that sometimes can be quite confused about why aren't the NSOs in the same place, or why aren't the NSOs even playing a much more prominent role in some of the principles that underlie these data flows. So anyways, all that to say is, yes, you won't have one model or one frame, but the intersection of these things, and in some cases, the lack of governance, when you see those issues pop up, along with the notion of confusion out there, I think makes our jobs sometimes very, very challenging. But thank you so much for that, Paul. Do you like, certainly not least again, obviously you've got some experience in the whole growing significance of citizen science data. How can data governance frameworks be supported by citizen science data? Specifically, from your experience, what are some critical structural elements that need to exist to integrate citizen science data into the governance framework? So how do you envision the role of citizen science data in transforming the landscape of data governance frameworks?
Thank you. These are a lot of questions. I'll try to start with the first one. So how can citizen science data support data governance framework, be at a global level or at any level, you name it? So I heard before real-time data, near real-time data, and gathering that is really important. And obviously we need new data sources such as citizen science to gather this real-time data, right? So there are a lot of citizen science initiatives, gather data through participants and make these data openly available for reuse and action. And there are global data sets related to, for instance, measuring many of the SDG indicators that also came up during the conversations, like marine plastics, mosquito-borne diseases monitoring, and biodiversity, air quality, water quality, and also in social and policy areas such as citizen satisfaction with public services, gender-based violence, and many others. So just to give a concrete example that I'm not talking about something really theoretical here, that is actually happening in practice. I don't know if colleagues from the Ghana Statistical Service are here, but we worked with the Ghana Statistical Service and the Environmental Protection Agency in Ghana to integrate already existing citizen science beach litter data from the beach cleanups into the official statistics of Ghana. Actually, GSS has integrated that, taking the leadership at the country level, bringing together diverse actors, which comes to, again, the multi-stakeholder approach that was brought up before. So they really brought these academia, civil society organizations that basically organize volunteers to go to the beaches in Ghana to collect litter and data on that litter, and then use the methodology of a global level citizen science initiative that is based in the US, and a lot of citizen science initiatives that are beach cleanup initiatives use the same methodology to collect litter and data, and then they produce this trash data, plastic litter trash data platform at a global level. So it's a global data set that countries actually can take the data from there, openly available, and basically use it for their SDG reporting for the indicator 14.1.1b, plastic debris density. And Ghana has done this leadership with partnership with us through academia, as well as UNEP has been an integral part as the custodian agency for this indicator. So what I'm trying to say here, this is possible, but we need some sort of framing, like manuals and guidelines of how countries actually use these data that are openly available and very valuable and very granular to address their data needs, to address their policy gaps, because this was a huge policy gaps in Ghana, and the results of this work is actually feeding into the integrated coastal and marine policy in Ghana currently. And so it's about the multi-stakeholder approach. This is basically bringing together stakeholders from diverse communities and building trust, as also came up, among these diverse stakeholders, and building trust in citizen science data, because it was a huge process that involved civil society organizations, and they had to explain the methodology, the global level initiative, as well as the citizen science initiatives, how this methodology was implemented on the ground. And this is really taking time, space, but we need to work on this, because these things are very innovative, which is also a very important part of this global or data governance framework, being innovative to address these, use the technologies that have been discussed. And also citizen science data can foster accountability of governments, because if you are to integrate data from civil society, from academia, from other organizations, then you're showing that you can actually work with this data, you are open to collaborations, and you are transparent in your actions. So this is also a very important part of this data governance framework. And supporting the transparency and communications of data, communication and dissemination of data is at the heart of citizen science projects. Like I said, there are these openly available global data sets on many of the issues that SDGs are covering. And communication with citizens to build trust of the citizens to data and to data governance and the governments is also really important, because citizen science initiatives make extra effort to reach out to citizens, to feedback on the data that they collect and submit, like what has happened with those data and how it was used to improve their lives. A lot of successful citizen science initiatives have their own teams of communications experts and other people that are working from diverse disciplines. And providing disaggregated data, that also came up. It is really important in order to reach those who are really vulnerable. And it can also actually help build resilient communities. For example, we talked about crisis, we talked about, or we can also talk about disasters in the context of crisis and COVID-19 and so on. So usually the most affected are those hard-to-reach communities and marginalized groups and so on. So citizen science efforts can support individuals and communities to have access to aid, for instance, through real-time data. And then what I would like to finalize my thoughts is, like, citizen science is really important in order to build the ecosystem, data ecosystem and governance framework that is really inclusive. And if we wanted to succeed, we need to be inclusive in our practices, in our guidelines, in our manuals. And I totally agree with the previous panelists, all the topics. And I think there's a huge role for citizen data, citizen science, and citizen data collaborative is really a means, and these communities really need to talk to each other a little bit closer. And I think this is a very good starting exercise to achieve this. Thank you.
Wonderful examples. Thank you very much. Look, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to take 3 questions in a row. So I'm going to ask you to just raise your hand, and you just have to trust me to pick the first 3. If you could be brief in your question, if you want to pose the question to one of the panelists, please say who you're posing it to, and then I will turn to them to answer. So I've got one here, one there, and anybody else? Third one wants to get in? And one, Oliver. Okay, so you, sir, have the floor first.
Thank you very much. My name is Haider Freyhat. I am the director of Jordan NSO, previously UN. So I see things from different perspectives. I need to address quickly a couple of points. One related to, are we ready to proceed as custodians of statistics, whether UN or countries, with revisiting the governance structure? I could see easily that there are many things just mentioned today, forget about everything else. Like, for example, the citizen generated data, private sector data, cross-border data, multi-stakeholderism, multi-stakeholder who will be involved and so on. There are many things that need to be tackled first before we come out with proposals to the rest of the community about how the data governance structure or model shall look like. And let me just zoom on one, sorry.
If you could be succinct in your question, that would be really
appreciated. Yes, just one thing. I have an experience with multi-stakeholderism, okay? In the past, there is now the Internet Governance Forum. The world has agreed under the auspices of the United Nations to go with the multi-stakeholderism approach to run internet and to govern the internet. Now, it turned out to be like 10 years experiment that this multi-stakeholderism approach is very unsuitable for such a precise and such profound endeavor. The multi-stakeholderism approach means, for me, is that you will have a country sitting on a table, next to it an NGO of 10, 15 people, a private sector, a journalist. All of them have equal weight in deciding and judging things. So I really want to put some reservation on the multi-stakeholderism approach in revisiting the topic. So I think, just to sum up, I think we need to do more work in terms of crystallizing the components of the framework. Thank you.
Thank you to our colleague from Jordan. I had you next, please.
My name is Juliet Solano, and the representative of the National Statistical Office of Colombia. First, I want to congratulate all the panelists for the good insights. Something that is remarkable in the way panelists have spoken is the prevalence of the principles approach, right? So how can we, as a statistical community, evolve in the understanding of the fundamental principle of confidentiality, which is translated in our words in statistical reserve and privacy, which in cases limits the partnerships we can build and the access we can provide to data and statistical information. So how can we do to manage this challenge? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give you the floor for our third question. Over to you.
Actually, also just to commend the presenters for the insightful discussion. Just a few comments before I ask the two questions, just put things in context. I think like Paul and many others have said, I think fragmentation really is going to be a problem. And I think it will continue, given that there are so many actors now in the data system, and that really we are not the only ones as statisticians that can control the environment anymore. And I think that we need to acknowledge. And therefore, I think the data governance framework itself will have several things in there. And actually what it actually means that we shall, I think one of the panelists were talking about having several principles that govern the different components of the data governance. So I think the question may be, one of the questions, a preliminary one, was that how do we really begin to engage the private sector who have the solutions? And most of them are not part of this conversation that we are having here. I do realize there's somebody now there from the private sector. We don't have the academia too. That are equally key players in the process. So the balancing act and trade-offs, I think, is going to be something that we shall continue juggling. So the question, perhaps, two questions that I have really, first of all, is that how do we then achieve consensus on data governance in bridging the gap between the private sector and academia, who are key players in the process? And the second part, again, to all the panelists there, is that how do we ensure that all these policy frameworks we are talking about within the data governance and in the entire production of the data value chain, how do we get them enforced at the Commission? And perhaps what the Commission is, possibly could do is to develop the principles around the data governance. I think that would be the question, and perhaps maybe the panelists, they would want to address that. Thank you very much.
Excellent questions. Thank you very much, colleagues. So look, there's, I would say, if I could, a bit of skepticism on a multilateral approach, using the internet as a bit of an example. The second one, again, around fundamental principles, but specifically as they pertain to confidentiality, privacy, and really the third around how do you begin to engage? I would say we've actually had lots of engagements with the private sector and academia in various forums within the UN system, but it would be good to get some of your perspectives on this, colleagues. And then the notion about enforcement, which I'm sure is a general question in the UN system at large. Anyway, so very easy questions for you panelists. So maybe each of you, I'll give a minute or so to provide your perspectives on these. So I'll just start with you, Angela, and then just work our way here.
Well, then I maybe deal only with enforcement in a minute, and definitely the UN. The way how we also discuss a lot is through incentives. So the core question in this data governance discussion is how do we construct inside the governance the incentive for compliance? And particularly for those that do not have any other incentive that just raise a flag, so the private sector. So are there principles that, for example, you have now you have fair trade, you have a logo, you go to the supermarket, you buy something that's for fair trade. Is there something like this that then we can engage the private sector, then they become compliance, and so people would give the data, or they would have incentive to really being part of that community that all adhere to the same principles.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo.
Very quickly also about the multi-stakeholder approach. I do believe that we are not saying that everyone have to stay have to follow have the same. You need to define which are the competencies and which are the what they have to commit. So it's not that everyone does the same things with the same level of. So this is something that is important to clarify, because still we can see based on our experience, that the best models are the ones that really are able to develop this multi-stakeholder approach. So this is one point. And then about the private sectors, indeed, and academia, these are really important players. Academia, most of the time, is a very valid advisory for the government and come and support them in defining standards and very good models to be implemented. And then for private sector, there are two aspects that are important. The private sector that is able to produce data and to put the data in the system, and then, but also there is a group of companies under private sector that work using data from the government. So the aspect of open data and all the quality that and the privacy issues and blah blah, we already said about that, are important also to support the creation of new services and new opportunities through private sector.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Just a note on the issues of multi-stakeholders and actual involvement of private sector and academia, which I think are linked because these are stakeholders. I agree it's probably difficult to envisage a situation where all these stakeholders sit around the table and then there's some sort of vote that is being taken on. No, I mean, I think that that is a fundamental task for policymaking to arbitrate between the different interests and requests of society. I mean, this is almost inherent in a democratic process, and this is the issue that the policymakers face every day. And here's just another manifestation of the need to find the right balance in society to go forward. And in some cases, there will have to be some legal act if it comes to accessing data from business, and it's just needed. Well, it can't be a democratic decision whether business wants it or not. In other cases, you will have to come in differently. But I think it's fundamentally a policy issue at a relatively high level of whole of government that we are facing.
Last but certainly not least, Eli.
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting question about the power relation when these actors come together and how they will be working together. If we want this process to be truly inclusive, I think it needs to be on an equal partnership. So we really need to make sure that we're understanding the motivations, interests, and and needs of these all diverse groups and communities. I'm not from the UN system, so I can easily say that. I think a truly inclusive process is really important to gain trust, because this whole thing, as far as I understand, trust is a very important point. And in terms of the academia interest or bringing academic perspectives, academia is really ready, but in some cases they are even frustrated, or we are sometimes frustrated about the fact that we are here, we want to work with you, but our voices are not really heard by the government agencies, as well as the CSOs, civil society organizations, in the same level. So we really need to make the effort that we're really doing all these processes in a truly inclusive way, not on a theoretically inclusive, but really truly inclusive. Thank you.
Well, colleagues, I think you'll agree that that was a fascinating conversation with just some amazing colleagues here on the panel. I would just leave you with a couple of thoughts. Those of you who are clearly driving national statistical organizations and leading them, that on the one hand, you should take some comfort that we come from a very strong position with lots of trust with citizens, with laws and a set of governance that has withstood the test of time. On the other hand, I would encourage you to be equally uncomfortable because what got you here isn't going to get you there. The world is in tremendous flux, and it's, I would say, we're at the half point of the game. We're not sure who's going to win. there are some very serious concerns that are being expressed. As was mentioned, the world doesn't look at data governance in one holistic way. There are new players emerging every day. There's misinformation that is unfortunately guiding and directing people and organizations, which can have some very significant challenges for just governance and democratization or whatever political system is in play. So I want you to remain vigilant. I want you to know that your leadership and asking the right questions in your context based on how these panelists have actually raised a number of dimensions on governance. They're going to have to be part of your toolkit. They are going to have to be on your radar, and they're going to have to be very, very carefully managed. So please join me in thanking all our panelists for an excellent conversation. So with that, Stefan, I turn it over to you to tell everybody what to do next.
Well, I know within the context of this event, but I don't know what to do next. Much larger. Let me be humble about this. No, I'll invite Angelique, who will be under the second session panel, to come up here. And we have maybe taking a 1 or 2 minute break, but I think because we want to also hear especially what our friends and partners from the private sector have to say, so that we want to start the next panel very quickly. Thank you.
to light.
Hello, everyone. Can you please return to your seats? Hoor je het? Okay. So please, everyone, return to your seats, please. We are very eager to start again here. I don't want to see that. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, and a big welcome to everyone. I'm so very pleased that you're all here. My name is Angelique Berg. I'm the Director General of Statistics Netherlands, and I'm very pleased to be here on this Friday, the warming up day for the Statistical Committee that we have next week. By way of introduction, I was listening to the last panel and I was thinking, yeah, I recognize this discussion very much. If I look at the situation in my country, in the Netherlands, there seems to be this really huge will to work with data in all sorts of forms, to enrich it, to bring different data sources together from private sector and public sector. On the one hand. On the other hand, there is even maybe just as big reluctance to work with data because of concerns about privacy and about profiling and etc., etc. So this is one of the dilemmas that we see, and that is influencing the way we structure data governance. And another observation is that there is so much information, there is so much data, and there is maybe not so much insight. And people don't know what's true anymore, they don't know who to trust. And this is another dilemma that sort of nurtures the first dilemma that I was sketching. So I don't have all the answers. And that's good that we are here together today to maybe learn from each other and also learn from people from the private sector. I think it's fair to say that sometimes the private sector is a little bit ahead on us in the public sector. And it's always good to have a dialogue between parties from private sector and the public sector. And that's what we are doing today in this panel. So I'm very happy that we have some distinguished speakers here today from the private sector and academia. And the central question, I think, for now is that what we can learn from the private sector. So This is by way of introduction. I think we have to look at the clock quite sharply because we have to end this meeting, unfortunately, at 1 o'clock sharp. Matthias from the United Nations told me that the lights are going to be switched off anyway, so 1 o'clock it is. So I won't be saying much more now. I'd like to hand the floor to our first speaker, Mr. Justin Sherman from Duke University. You do a lot of work on data brokerage, on cybersecurity, on data privacy and technology policy. So we very much like to hear from you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, there we go. All right. Thank you. And thank you to, first and foremost, Angelique and the rest of the team for having us all here. As we said, the lights will be turning off at some point, so I will not take too much time out of my colleagues and our discussion. So I split my time both teaching and researching on data privacy and what are harmful data privacy practices, and consulting on what are strong data privacy practices. What does this look like in practice, from NGOs all the way to corporations and startups? And so what I want to talk about just for a few minutes is the work we do at Duke University looking at data brokers. So data brokers are a multi-billion-dollar global industry, and the core of data brokers is selling data. So these are companies that collect data, they aggregate data, they analyze data. The business model is selling it. So we're not quite talking about companies that use data internally, right? There are lots of companies that collect GPS location, health information for their own business purposes. We're not talking about companies that share data to help their business purpose, right? So you might use a banking app from a financial services company, and they might share some of your device data with a fraud and anti-fraud company to verify your identity. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about companies where the business model is taking all of that information they gather and then selling it. And so this is a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Most people have not heard of this industry, but there are thousands and thousands of companies around the world where the business model is selling data. So this is a multi-billion-dollar market in the US, in India, in Brazil, in Europe. The list goes on. And so it's a really, really interesting situation because it's a diverse market. You have companies that sell things that many folks here are well familiar with: statistical information, neighborhood or region level risk data, right? So informing insurance companies, how often do crimes or fires occur in this area, right? All the way to companies that sell data about people. Health conditions, mental health prescriptions, people's financial information, how much money do you earn at your job, selling your location data. There's a really, really rich market around building up these profiles on specific people to then sell to advertisers, to companies, and for other purposes. I always say, right, if we went around the room right now and said, name 5 fun facts about yourself, maybe you panic a little bit, right? But it's not that hard to come up with 5 things about yourself. Some of these companies sell thousands of data points on specific people. So the depth of data, the breadth of data gathered and sold on specific individuals is quite large. So this is a highly unregulated ecosystem across all of these countries I mentioned, the US, India, Europe. And the reason is when we talk about data privacy, I know other panelists will touch on this as well, we often think about the relationship between the person and the organization collecting the data, right? Whether that's for a census, whether that's for an app that they're using, whether that's financial services, and that's important, right? That's a big relationship and informs what data is gathered. That's where the conversation usually stops. And that's where you lose, well, what happens next with that data? Is that data being reused? Is that data being shared? Is that data being sold? Is that data being repurposed? Are there things being done with the data well outside what it was originally meant for? And so just a few examples, and then I'll wrap here, of the work we've done at Duke has looked at how scammers have bought information about older people suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia. You can buy these lists from these data brokers. You can use this to then target people with scams and steal millions of dollars from them. You can buy location data and use this to follow people around. You can learn what kinds of medical facilities are you going to. Is this person visiting a voting booth? Is this person visiting an addiction treatment center, right? So when you start thinking about all of the things you can infer from this data, it gets even more concerning. So I want to wrap by, what does this mean for data governance, right? So two buckets of things. The first is myths, and the second is best practices. So I think this underscores some important myths about privacy. One is around this idea of consent. There are plenty of cases in which people use an app, they take a government survey, they use an online service, and they do understand what that company is doing with their data. There are plenty of cases where consumers have no idea what is going on with their data. They do not understand it's going to be packaged up and sold. They do not understand that if I use a mental health app, now police might access this information. Now my health insurance agency or company can access this information. So it's really important for thinking about, how do we build principles to make sure that people understand what's happening with the data, but also understand the secondary uses of that data. If it's going to be sold, shared, repurposed, making that clear to those people. And the second bucket of things is good practices, right? Plenty of companies, as I said, do not do this kind of activity. Plenty of organizations do not do this kind of activity. And so thinking about things like, what are our controls on data sale? What are our controls on data reuse, right? And thinking generally about the fact that regulations on privacy, right? We often hear this, right? Privacy regulation is good because it prevents bad uses of data. That's absolutely true, and that's absolutely important, right? But it also boosts trust. And when you have bad privacy practices in one area, whether that's public sector or private sector, that degrades overall trust in data collection. And now all of a sudden you have people who are skeptical of filling out government surveys, or skeptical about using apps that do have encryption, that do have good privacy practices, because they read in the news or they saw an incident where somebody had egregious privacy practices. And so I would just end on, I think, these are good case studies in seeing kind of what not to do, because that can lead to broader principles for trust. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Justin. Maybe just to have a bit of an interactive session as well, is there anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question to Justin right now? No one yet? Maybe for me then, how do these data brokers get their data in the first place?
Three main ways. So some of these companies gather this directly. So they might collect information about their own users of an app, of an online service, and then sell it, unbeknownst to those users. Sometimes this is indirect. So, for instance, many mobile apps on the major app stores that we all use sell location data. They don't advertise this, but they will take location data that they gather about their users and sell it. And you say, why would you do that? You can make tens of thousands of dollars, even more a month, just by doing that. You send the file one time, you make a bunch of additional money. It's a pretty attractive offer as an app developer. And the third main way, which I know this was a good segue because some others are talking about AI, is inference and figuring out what can we learn from data we already have that's new. And so two examples I always give is app downloads. If you know someone has a Muslim prayer app or a Christian news app on their phone, right, or an LGBTQ dating app, right, that yes or no, like that one very simple data point, can give away something like religion or sexual orientation, right, which is pretty sensitive. You can also have more sophisticated things where you're combining data sets. I know this might come up with other panelists, analyzing data sets. You can even track people's location movements, right? And you can see, oh, every time before they go to work, they stop at this school, they must be dropping their kid off at school. Right, so not too crazy to think about, but you can start to learn a lot of really intimate things about all of our lives, political beliefs, religious practices, other things that we all have the right to choose to disclose or keep private based on those inferences.
All right, thank you very much, Justin. So what this tells us, I think, especially because you talked also about the myth of consent, that people sometimes have no idea what happens with the using of an app, for instance, like you mentioned just before, is that the data governance in the private sector is also relevant for all of us here who work with data and are absolutely reliant upon people wanting to give their data to the public sector to produce official statistics. So that's, I think, a very helpful insight. So the thing we are dealing with, the question of data governance, goes both for the public sector and for the private sector. You can't just think, oh, well, we've done an okay job for the public sector and leave it at that, because I think I agree with you that it influences overall trust, right? Okay, thank you very much. Now, well, the plot thickens, I think, when we go to our next speaker, which is Mr. Inkit Padhi. I hope I pronounce it well. And also with us is Ms. Harini Srinivasan. I'll do my best. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. So thanks very much for being with us. You both work with IBM, and well, we'd love to hear your point of view on this topic. Thanks very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'll talk about data governance and data use, especially from the lens of AI and foundation model in general. I hope my slides are in there. Okay, can I go to the next slides, please? So I'll start with giving a very quick overview of how IBM and especially our department contributes to the field of trustworthy AI. We focus on various algorithmic aspects, fairness, explainability, robustness, transparency, and have been publishing in a lot of top AI venues, especially also contributing by releasing some of the open source tools that we have developed over the years. So in addition to that, we have been participating actively in and engaging in various working groups, especially the EU Commission on AI and National AI Strategy initiatives. Next slide. So for a long time, enterprises has a bare minimum policy of don't be evil, which isn't quite enough in this day and age. It is mostly because of how norms and policies are expanding. And not just that, new laws, industry standards, the risk definitions are getting redefined as well. And this is the reason why enterprises need to take a more proactive rather than reactive step towards governance. Next slide. Towards that goal, we have been actively working on both defining new risks and also mitigating these risks. The taxonomy of risk is defined within our governance framework that helps us recognizing them across various products and solutions that we offer. Next slide. So to offer various risks, we have provided a risk atlas which kind of defines 44 different harms that can be associated with different stages of AI development and deployment. For the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about this in this talk, but I'm happy to discuss this in more detail. But do check out the risk atlas, which has some definitions and examples of what are the different risks that appears in today's AI, and especially in terms of large language model. Next slide. Yeah. For our governance effort, we have a structure to ensure smooth functioning across the organization. So it includes Privacy Advisory Committee that oversees the privacy and AI ethics of different AI offerings, while the AI Ethics Board is responsible for centralized functioning of our governance strategy. So the foundation and success of both these axes depend on various advocates who make sure that our governance practices are in check and also in action. Next slide. So this chart basically gives an overview of how data governance play a role in IBM model. You can see that the data governance is ensures that the workflow between watsonx data and the watsonx AI field move smoothly and seamlessly. So the workflow here covers all the way from data acquisition to data cleaning to annotation, filtering, which falls under the watsonx data. And also it bridges into and moves into data tokenization, which is eventually the input to the any large language model training or FM foundation model training in general. So you can imagine that starting from acquisition to data processing and before being fed into model training, our governance plays a role in keeping everything in check. Next slide. Yeah. So because of this need to have governance across the board and more streamlined, we do have a watsonx governance solution, which is built in conjunction with our team in IBM Research. This was done with an objective to monitor and mitigate risks from model, data set, or even from regulations. So the first one, responsible AI team, helps maintaining the safe and responsible practices to every generative AI solutions that we have. In addition to that, the transparency and explainability is theme helps demystifying the black box nature of these model, so that you can provide user-friendly dashboards and customizable reports that are necessary for the users to see and understand the model better. Lastly, the policy and regulatory management team ensures that at every step in this pipeline, we do have internal policy and conform to the external regulations as well. Next slide. So we also take extra effort to ensure that our governance efforts are in sync with external regulation and compliance grading. Especially, I would like to highlight fact sheets, which we leverage to manage governance. It involves mentioning all the information about data, model, and use cases, and also establish processes to manage communication flow from data scientists to model operation administrators. Next slide. I'll jump quickly to data use. So we do have a suite of products that addresses the problem of impacted by climate and sustainability issues. We combine data sets such as weather and remote sensing data with the client data set that are available to build unique solutions to meet these operational challenges. Next slide. So this kind of highlights what are the different challenges and how both weather kind of impacts many businesses. Harini, my colleague here, is especially expert in this. So if you have more questions, I'm sure she will be able to answer them as well. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Inkit, for this insight from IBM. Same question to people from the audience. Is there any question already to Inkit? No one? Very clear all? All right, thank you so much. So you mentioned that IBM has a privacy and AI ethics oversight body. So can you tell me a little bit more how that works? What does that oversight body do exactly within the company?
So, primarily, one of the things that we have been focusing, and a lot of enterprises these days are focusing on large language model. So that involves acquiring a lot of data. So we ensure that our data go through all the safety requirements, especially from private information that are not there of users or which are easily available out there in the internet. So we make sure that we don't feed those as an input to the language model in order to train them. And also do have some of the algorithms while training this language model for differential privacy to ensure that they don't spew out information about users and and which is of concern to any use case that you can think of.
Okay, so this is some sort of good governance, I think, institute within the company, right?
Indeed, yes.
And was there any regulation that compelled you to do that, or is this from the values of the company itself that it exists?
I think both, and a lot of companies, and that's what I mentioned earlier and as well about the reactive and the proactive nature of it. So we do have our internal policies as well, and that's governed by the governance framework that we have. But also regulatory and the law form that does require us to follow them as well, and we maintain, and both of these are in sync with it, and make sure that we are working towards that.
Thank you. I have a question, just a minute. I have a question back to Justin, maybe, because there seems to be some sort of discrepancy about the data brokerage that you described and the way IBM is dealing with data. Do you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously can't speak to IBM per se, but this was exactly my point, right? There is a wide spectrum of privacy and data handling practices within the private sector, right? I'm not going to go on about like Facebook or something, but sometimes the media, right, it's tempting to kind of cluster all of technology in one spot, and that's reductive, right? Because there's a wide range of companies doing really exploitative, invasive things, companies doing things where consumers are aware of what's happening with their data, where there are, as much as you can have within a company, accountability mechanisms or external oversight or input, or right. So, and that's again gets back to kind of what I think we were both hitting on, of that boosts overall trust in these kinds of technologies. When you see things like AI being used in ways that people agree with, that are positive use cases, that have controls, et cetera, and staying away from things they shouldn't be used for, that boosts trust in the technology overall, versus if you don't do that, or there's only a focus on the bad, then you degrade the public's acceptance of that technology.
Okay, thank you so much. Harini, you wanted the floor, please.
Yeah, okay, it works. No, I just wanted to add to what Inkit said, that the value part is very important. So in addition to privacy, there's also the ethics and bias. These are all part of, some of the capabilities that he, some of the tools, they also make sure there is no bias. There can be bias in the data and how the model is built and how it infers the results. So those are all things that are kind of automatically checked.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll continue with the next speaker. Thank you, Harini and Inkit, for your presentation. Very, very insightful. And building on this exploration, we now turn our attention to the practical applications of data governance in data transfer and the use of sensitive data. A secure transfer of data, we all know the terms, of course. It's essential also in relation to trust. And our next speaker is from Palantir Technologies, and he will introduce us to the topics. And the floor is all yours, Mr. Arnav Jagasia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good morning. Thank you for having me here. My name is Arnav Jagasia. I am the engineering lead of the Privacy and Civil Liberties engineering team at Palantir Technologies. Palantir is a US-based software company that builds software which enables public, private, and non-governmental organizations to integrate, analyze, and collaborate on their data in a secure and privacy-protective way. We're proud to make software that enables the institutions that serve our societies to carry out their missions to use data responsibly and effectively. Our customers span a variety of jurisdictions and domains, from government agencies like the National Health Service in the United Kingdom to commercial organizations like Airbus, Ferrari, and the Cleveland Clinic, to the UN's very own World Food Program. These organizations use Palantir software platforms to understand their data, analyze it at scale, and ultimately make better data-driven decisions. Our company was founded more than 20 years ago on the conviction that it's essential to preserve fundamental principles of privacy and civil liberties while using data. And it's for this reason that Palantir established one of the world's first privacy and civil liberties engineering teams more than a decade ago, specifically to focus on the development of privacy-protective technology and to foster a culture of responsibility around its development and its use. And as a member of this team, one of our most important focus areas is building capabilities for data protection and data governance. As increasingly more organizations adopt emerging technologies like artificial intelligence or machine learning, I want to emphasize one key learning from our firsthand experience. It's that data governance and data protection are the cornerstones of any pursuit of advanced analytics and data-driven operations. The success of any organization, be it a commercial business or a government agency, in adopting novel data analytics techniques depends on that organization's ability to securely manage and protect their data while still enabling collaboration and meaningful outcomes. So in my opening remarks, I want to briefly discuss how capabilities for data protection and data governance can empower agencies and organizations to make the most of their data while still meeting their regulatory and ethical obligations. And specifically, I want to highlight three key areas where technology can help institutions apply data protection principles in practice. First is governing data access. Access controls are crucial for data governance and data protection, as they allow organizations to control who has access to sensitive data. And by implementing robust access controls, organizations can ensure that only authorized individuals can actually access certain data, reducing the risk of unauthorized exposure or data misuse. Commonly, organizations use well-established mechanisms like role-based access controls or classification-based access controls. And we're continuing to innovate on further access control mechanisms like purpose-based access controls that ensure that data is only used for purposes that data subjects have consented to. The second facet I want to mention is data provenance. Data provenance refers to the ability to trace and track the origin, ownership, and transformation history of data. This is a foundational capability for data governance, as it provides transparency and accountability, enabling organizations to understand the source and the reliability of their data. Especially as organizations seek to adopt more advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, data provenance is essential for building trust in data. And software platforms can really assist with this aspect of data governance, providing a digital infrastructure required to comprehensively track where data came from and how it might be used. The third facet I want to touch on is data minimization. Data minimization involves collecting and retaining only the necessary and relevant data for a specific purpose. As organizations seek to collaborate with each other, it's important to analyze what and how much data is required for a given task. And by minimizing the scope and type of the data that's used, or even collected in the first place, organizations can better mitigate the risk of data breaches or privacy violations. And privacy-enhancing techniques for anonymization or pseudonymization can further enhance data minimization by providing granular minimization at a column, row, or even cell level to enforce this data protection principle in practice. Lastly, I want to take a moment to highlight that while technology plays a vital role in data protection, data governance and data protection go beyond just technical solutions. Organizations need to establish comprehensive policies, procedures, and guidelines to govern data throughout its life cycle, from collection to handling, storage, sharing, and ultimately deletion. And furthermore, employee skill building and awareness programs are crucial to ensure that individuals understand their responsibilities and follow best practices for data protection and data governance. As such, data protection is not just a technical domain, it's a socio-technical one. Stakeholders across legal, privacy, and security teams need to collaborate in organizations to apply these regulatory requirements for data protection into practice. Discussions about data governance often gloss over these more fundamental aspects. So I want to wrap up my opening remarks today by re-emphasizing that these data protection technologies are not just for advanced commercial organizations at the cutting edge. Rather, these capabilities are necessary for organizations to provide a foundation for data-driven analytics and operations. And it's imperative that these organizations or agencies, especially those modernizing from legacy data systems, adopt these kinds of techniques to ensure robust data governance in practice. For the past 20+ years, we've helped our government and commercial customers build with data protection and privacy by design. And as more nations adopt data protection regulations, these capabilities are only going to become increasingly more important. So thank you to everyone here today for your interest in data governance, and I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much, Arnav. I'll ask the question again. Anyone from the audience who wants to say something? Ah, I see the Dutch delegation helps me out. Wim.
Well, yes, we will try to help you out. Now, I had a very practical question. We are from the old world, where for statisticians, data protection and in the way they work wasn't really incorporated. It's something that we discovered over the last years. So can you tell us something about what you encounter and what were the most difficult problems to come to a higher level of data protection in the way we work, or the companies where you work for now work? A bit practical question, but maybe.
No, it's a great question, and I appreciate the question. Thank you very much. I think one of the challenges that comes with adopting data governance in practice is getting very concrete about specific workflows and understanding the privacy or data protection concerns with those specific workflows. There's no one-size-fits-all kind of policy or practice for data governance in the abstract. It's best evaluated very concretely, understanding what the privacy harms are, what the practical constraints are, who the intended users are, and maybe the threat model of how data will be used or abused. So I think as an organization is working through how to adopt data protection and data governance in practice, it's important to get as close to the details and as close to the end users as possible. In fact, as close to the data subjects or those who the data is about as possible, in order to understand what specific remediations can be put in place. There's no silver bullet to all of data protection and privacy. It's often done in a defense in-depth kind of approach, layer by layer. So any incremental progress towards a concrete workflow is your surest path forward.
Thank you. Any reflection, Justin? I saw you taking notes.
Say it later. We'll
yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much, Arnav, for your presentation. Now we go, I think, to a little bit different field of the spectrum, if I can say so. Our next speaker is Dr. Danielle Kavanagh-Smith, and she's from LinkedIn, and I believe you prepared a presentation on the screen, so the floor is all yours.
Thank you, and thanks again to the organizers of the UN Statistical Commission for your invitation to be here today. As mentioned, I'm a data scientist on the Economic Graph Research Institute at LinkedIn, which is a group of data scientists and social scientists who work together to analyze LinkedIn's data to glean macroeconomic insights about the global labor market. And today I'm pleased to talk about LinkedIn's Data for Impact program and how we hope to support the important work of statistical agencies worldwide. So LinkedIn is the world's largest online professional social network with over 1 billion global members who share information about their educational backgrounds, their ongoing skill development, and their career choices on our platform. This digital representation of global economic activity, which we call the Economic Graph, provides detailed, real-time labor market insights across many countries. Next slide, please. Through our Data for Impact program, we share these data and insights that are gleaned from our economic graph with dozens of governments and nonprofit entities because our vision as a company is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce, and we know we can't do this alone. We rely on meaningful operational partnerships with agencies like the ones represented here today to work towards this vision. Next slide, please. As with all data, ours have limitations, which underscores its value to enrich rather than to replace administrative data sources. One limitation stems from our utmost commitment to member privacy and compliance with regulatory controls, which restricts the level and amount of data we can share. Because protecting members' privacy is our first priority, we only share anonymized, aggregated data sets that meet strict data quality thresholds. Another limitation is that the representativeness of our data varies across different labor market segments. Finally, because our data is structured for LinkedIn's purposes, our classification and labeling systems may differ from those of government partners. Next slide, please. Despite these limitations, our data have had tremendous impact. For example, in the US, we're sharing data on hiring trends and skill acquisition to inform an evaluation of the U.S. National Science Foundation's multi-million-dollar investment into local innovation. We've also provided data to organizations like the World Bank and the IMF to help inform green recovery strategies in the wake of COVID-19. And we share monthly data to supplement the labor market monitoring efforts of entities like the German Statistical Authority. Through the partnerships that we've built, we've learned three key lessons. Next slide, please. First, many government organizations, which often have low risk tolerance and highly concentrated decision-making structures, are unfamiliar with data partnerships. Therefore, we approach these partnerships as long-term institutional relationships which require building trust, consistently socializing key objectives, and carefully reviewing governance protocols to lay the groundwork for strong collaboration. Next slide, please. Second, these partnerships require ongoing innovation. We have explored tech solutions like differential privacy and data clean rooms, which would allow us to preserve member privacy while also enabling partners to extract useful insights from our data. We've also worked with partners to validate our data using their administrative sources to assess its representativeness of overall labor markets. Finally, we've leveraged our unique data taxonomies as a strength rather than a weakness and used them to enhance partners' data labeling systems. Next slide, please. Third, early impact alignment is essential. We work diligently to align with partners on the intended impact of data sharing at the start of our collaboration. We build relationships with open communication to address misaligned expectations. We clearly articulate our data offerings to avoid confusion, and we regularly follow up with partners to consistently drive program improvements. Next slide, please. Ultimately, public-private partnership is key to driving data-informed policy and public investment. Collaboratives like the Industry Data for Society Partnership and the Development Data Partnership, which facilitate private data sharing for public benefit, have been critical for us in continuing to learn from and promote this work. In this effort, we look forward to collaborating with you in exploring how our data, or perhaps other privately sourced data, can support your agency's work to achieve social impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I think I don't see any hands raised. I'm not going to ask the question again. I think we'll continue to our last speaker, which is Professor Yilu Zhou from Fordham University.
Yes, thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I'm Yilu Zhou. I'm a professor at Fordham University, associated with the Gabelli School of Business, and I'm also the director of the Masters of Science in Business Analytics program. So I'll talk about some new trends in technology in the area of data analytics today. Next slide, please. I would say the biggest trend I'm seeing is the integration of technologies. So, decades of years ago, it used to be, all statistics that's working on data and data-related issues, and then we start to see data mining. And in these days, we know that the majority of the data is unstructured. So we start to see in the last 10 years more and more need for using text mining, natural language processing, language models to process data. And the machine learning that we are using now has progressed into deep learning. So it's no longer the traditional machine learning, it's AI, it's deep learning, it's convolutional network. And there is no single model or single method that can address the need. So we very often see integration of different technologies and integration of different data. Next slide, please. And in terms of application domains, there is a trend of data analytics, data science going into all different domains. It used to be marketing, finance, being the big domains. Now it's everywhere in healthcare, education, government, manufacturing, and even in fashion, which I'll give some examples today. Some of the finance companies, such as J.P. Morgan, they claim that they are not financial company; they're technology company because they really hire more engineers to do the work. So I think the depth and the width of the different application domains that we're seeing in data analytics is huge. Next slide. And I want to touch a little bit more on the technology trend. I talked about the mixed method and technology integration. We also see a rising trend of using image recognition because there's a lot of data that's embedded in image that can be complementary data sources for us. The use of deep learning, the use of natural language processing, and we all get a lot of hypes with the generative AI and LLM. But the next question is, data privacy. Can we build specialized or private generative AI and LLM models for specific usage? And of course, cloud computing. Everything is now hosted on the cloud now. Next slide. And other trends. We always talk about big data, but often we hear from private and public sectors that they have smaller data set. Can we still do machine learning? Can we still analyze? Can we still predict certain results? And so there are more and more studies looking into the smaller data set and how you can use more advanced algorithms and also incorporating data from other resources, from social media, from discussion forums, from other data sources that can sort of enlarge the data set and make predictions. Multimodality of data, it's no longer numerical data, it's textual data, it's video, it's audio. We're looking at, for example, CEO interviews. Can we use that data? And real-time data stream, so it's not static data. You get an Excel file or get a CSV file. It's all coming from online interactively. Data sharing, open source data, where we can get more data. I remember in the old days when I worked on a project called CopLink when I was in Arizona. Once we're trying to track records of criminals, but when the criminal is crossed to California, you no longer have the data because they are not shared between the police department. So what is a better way of data sharing, visualization, and of course cybersecurity and ethics of data that we are hearing a lot today. And I want to give you maybe some quick examples of the things that I'm working on. And next slide, please. The first one is in the finance area. So in finance, people always, look at company revenues, financial statements, 10K, 10Q reports, but there are other data sources that can be useful. So for example, we look at CEO interviews, and we try to use image recognition to capture the CEO facial recognition, their emotions, and we do comparisons between interviews, try to get a sense of the CEO's emotion in that period, in that quarter of the company, and combined with their transcripts, what they natural language processing, we can get some better predictions of the company performance. Next slide. Another example. This is in about mobile apps. And I mean, as parents, we're concerned about kids downloading inappropriate apps that has the wrong maturity rating. And how can you build an algorithm to better predict or better classify the mobile app maturity ratings? The answer is, you look at the description, you look at the reviews, but you also look at the screen captures of these mobile apps. So you may detect a gun, and you know that this is not for 4+ kids. Shooting, or sometimes you detect gambling in the in the screenshots. Behind it, of course, we're using a lot of convolutional neural network, deep learning, the embeddings, and it's not one algorithm, it's multiple algorithms putting together. We call this multimodality, to perform the prediction. So that's just another example where you can use multiple data sources. The last example that I want to give is in a very unique domain, fashion. And next slide, please. So fashion is not a domain that people think you can really do prediction, or you do a lot of data analytics. So we want to show that you actually can. Fashion trend can be predicted if you have the right data. So if fashion can be predicted, anything can be predicted. So we get data from runways, and people don't realize that they go to runways to get inspirations. They think that it's all their innovation, their instinct, but they are actually getting resources or data sources from runways. They're looking at Instagram. They're being influenced by Instagram. So we collect all this data, and these are just some examples of the fashion trends that we can observe over 7-8 years of time. You see the spikes because fashion is seasonal, so it's something that's high in winter will be low in the summer. But basically, you can see how the red line very well capture the trends. So like high-waisted shorts is going down, right? And so on and so forth. So there are a lot of examples. And next slide, please. And we talked about fashion inspiration, and the designers don't believe that they get inspirations from others. But if you do good data analytics, you can show them that they do. Because you can capture what element that was used, in Versace, maybe was used in another designer, 3 years ago in one of the fashion runways. So once you put all these elements together, you can use network analysis to trace the fashion inspiration among the designers. So that's just an example of inspiration network from for the color lilac. And next slide. This slide is not so much about data analytics, but I want to show you once you have all this data, you can better use generative AI. This was done actually before ChatGPT became popular. We were doing image generation, but in the back end, we've collected image data, we've collected trend data, so how you can use neural network to generate interesting images. These are some examples to show you, what are the new trends in data analytics, what can be done, different technologies, and different data sources. Thank you.
And thank you, Yilu, for your presentation. This is excellent. Thank you so much. Now, I think that if we take 2 steps back, what we see here this morning is that, of course, data and AI are everywhere in our world, right? And it's never going to go away again, and things are only going to speed up, probably. And I think that both public and private organizations are involved in the same dance around possibilities on the one hand and risks on the other hand, and trying to find a balance somewhere in between. And that is difficult, and that is, I think, a question for policymakers, which we are not. We are mere statistical bureaus, but also for organizations themselves, right? To wonder, how can I ethically or from a privacy perspective account for what I am doing? So if we look at it that way, maybe starting with you, Justin, what can we in the public sector learn from what you have seen in the private sector.
Yeah, so a couple things. I mean, one which was touched on, Arnav made a few comments about this, right? Risk models is an interesting thing to think about, right? AKA, what am I worried about someone doing with this data or technology? And I think this is really important. As he said, there's no silver bullet for anything. Anyone who tries to sell this to you is selling you vaporware, but, nonsense. But you have to think about, what am I concerned about, right? So for instance, if I have, let's say I have health data, right? And I want to be able to do, as a clinical research center, AI analysis, I'll just say broadly, of that health data, right? So maybe my privacy model is, okay, we need the algorithm to be able to analyze the data. I'm just concerned about, can individual people at this center go in and look up everybody's medical history, right? So maybe then you lean more towards a privacy solution that says, like differential privacy or masking or something else that says, we're going to let the algorithm be able to analyze this data, but a human who opens the file is going to see garbled nonsense, basically, or not the actual data. But that's not a silver bullet, right? If I'm not concerned, let's say I'm not concerned about somebody seeing one person's health condition, I'm worried about somebody building an AI tool to analyze somebody's behavior and then infer their mental health status or mental health conditions, right? Then that doesn't help, because I'm actually concerned about somebody building that model as the end result, right? That's the really damaging thing we're trying to prevent, not necessarily seeing the data itself. So I'll just say, I think that's a really great point, but I think breaking that out, right? Companies, nonprofits, governments, that's a really important thing. What are our use cases? What are we most concerned about in each use case? How do we match that to technology and controls? The second thing I want to highlight, and sometimes this is very hard to do for folks who work in the private sector on this, is prioritize. Right, like we could all sit here all day, I'm sure, and come up with thousands of really interesting potential use cases, also potential harms. What do we do, right? You could sit there all day on a whiteboard, coming up with scenarios. But prioritizing, what are our most important use cases for this data? What do we need to do this for? And then what are our biggest risks, right? Because you could spend, cybersecurity or privacy, you could spend money all day on this, keep going forever, and you will never get rid of the risk, right? You can't eliminate risk. It's not like, if I say, I don't want to ever be on a sinking ship, I'm not going to get on a boat. I can avoid the risk completely. We can't avoid these risks with technology. So figuring out, how do we prioritize what are the biggest problems? And this is a simple idea, but again, it's hard to do when you're sort of faced with this. Literally try and order, or try and quantify, or try and build frameworks, as other folks said, to figure out whether it's representativeness, as we were hearing, right, or whatever the issue is. How do we prioritize what we care about the most?
Thank you. Same question to you, please.
I'll just like to add to what Justin mentioned. Like, one of the beginning issue that we deal with is kind of recognizing that there are risks. And that's the first, that we should understand that there are risks that are involved, and then defining what those risks are. And I think that's what we are currently lacking in, building a taxonomy of what are the possible risks, be it any AI model, or be it, for example, language model, right? That we are seeing so much getting used every other day, and every single day, rather every second. So I think recognizing and defining those risks is the first thing before we start even attempt to mitigating them. So that's one. And also there's a issue of the data provenance, right? Like which Arnav mentioned as well. We need to know, where is this data coming from? Who is defining it? Who created it? And was it modified during the whole process of acquisition? How was it modified? Which country was it modified in? Who was it targeted to, these data? And it's very important to kind of understand these questions of provenance, which is very important. It does not just end there. I think once we start using this, any AI model, for example, using this data, and while this AI model is in production, isn't getting used by a million of people, the question is, what happens to the AI model when the actual data license is, for example, expiring, right? How does that play with the already existing AI model? I think those questions need to be addressed, and every stakeholders need to work towards that.
Thank you so much. Anfak, any reflections from your side?
I think if I could take it in maybe a little bit of a different direction, one thing that's important for data governance kind of in practice is kind of the learning that organizations don't need to always build their solution in-house from scratch for every single project. And it might make sense in certain contexts and for certain projects, but oftentimes these like commercial off-the-shelf solutions might be more affordable, scalable, and tested for things like data protection and data governance. I think this advice applies equally to commercial organizations themselves as it does for government agencies trying to procure a new system or adopt a new system. And it goes to the question that I answered earlier, but I think it's always critical to evaluate the entire market of opportunities for your next technological development, and especially when it comes to these key capabilities of data governance and data protection that sometimes might get overlooked otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Danielle, maybe another question to you, because we in the public sector as statistical bureaus, we are used to working with primary data collection that we do from the queries that we organize ourselves, and also with administrative data that we get from other government bodies. But do you see, you work together already with some government agencies with your data. Do you see any further possibilities for this, for so-called public-private cooperation?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I'm here today too. So I'm happy to meet with anyone who wants to talk, and also I should say the email address dataforimpact@linkedin.com. So if you are interested in exploring opportunities to partner in data sharing, please take advantage of that email address if we're not able to connect. But yes, I think we do believe really strongly and work well with governments in sharing this data to advance, I guess, social impact. I think two unique areas that governments can think about in contributing to these partnerships and helping us make the case for them are, one, to offer to validate our data. As I mentioned, we have a really one of our limitations is that our representativeness varies, and so it's helpful. I think oftentimes that is the biggest value that we find in collaborating with statistical bureaus, is understanding which aspects or which elements of our data are most representative or can serve as alternatives to traditional administrative data sources. And then secondly, when we do share, or I guess in anticipation of sharing, really clearly articulating what the potential impact is of our data, because on our side, we offer it at no cost to government partners, but it helps us make the business case for continuing to do that if we can speak to definitively what the impact of the outputs are that we are sharing with government partners.
All right, thank you. Yilu, a little bit the same questions, slightly different, I think, for you. What, in your view, because you had some very concrete examples of how data is being used, what can governmental organizations learn from that, from the private sector?
Thank you. I think one thing is how to explore data outside of what you already have. And that's not only for government, that's for any private sectors as well. If you look at fashion, it's not only how many clothes you sell, it's also what people are wearing on the street, which you can get from other data sources. I think, so take example of labor statistics, there are outside information that you can use as well. I think that would be my biggest suggestion, is to look at multiple different data sources from social media. It could just be the pictures, because there are a lot of picture to text technologies that you can actually interpret what is in the picture. And from forums, from weather data, so all sorts of data that could help us.
Do you also think that it would be possible in future to replace these new forms of data with the old ones? I mean, if you look at the statistical bureaus, we are struggling sometimes also to get a representative image of what's happening, because people are more and more reluctant to comply with us, to fill out the queries and etc. And maybe we should in that way look at new data sources to replace the old ones.
Yes, I think it's a question of data standardization. So within the organization, you need to build your data standardization, and there should be an extra step from outside data and how you transform the data into the standard format that you have. And we face that a lot. Just take example of color. There are probably 3,000, 5,000 different ways of how people describe color. But essentially, you need to standardize that into, a color system that can be used across the board, and data as well. You get image data, but you cannot use that immediately. So you have to transform that into what color it is, what's in the pocket, and then sort of make that standard with your current data format. And then the models can apply on the data set. So I think it's just a matter of an extra step of data transformation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to look around if there's... Paul, yes, please.
I would just like to make a comment rather than pose a question, but a comment to Danielle's mention of the data development partnership and confirming that this is really tremendously valuable for the international organizations, the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, to be involved with the digital players and having a single focal point, a single framework, single protocols by which we can access and use your data. And so this is very, very useful from our perspective, but of course I was very pleased to hear that this is also useful for yourselves, including from a business perspective, not just from an altruistic perspective. And I note also with pleasure and interest that you are sort of offering the possibilities to NSOs and to other institutions to also engage along this venue. I think this is something we really should pursue. It's sort of co-investment. It's not free. I mean, we all need to put our heads together to get it going. But I think it's a very good example for how to move forward in this space. So I just wanted to underline and acknowledge that.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I agree very much. Anyone else? That gentleman over there in the back of the, I can't really... Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Johannes Jutting. I work for an organization which is called Paris 21 that specifically supports statistical capacity development, let's say, in the global south. So what I really found interesting, it's a really fascinating panel. And my question goes a little bit into the direction of, can we treat all countries the same? It seems that we have discussed it from a broad perspective of governments. But I would like to challenge the panel a little bit to unpack this situation for countries of different levels of development. Now, specifically, I like the presentation by Danielle from LinkedIn when you spoke about the determinants of the relationship, your partnerships in terms of risk awareness, in terms of the strengths of the governance frameworks, in terms of preferences. And my guess is that those are very different in countries of the emerging economies versus those like the Netherlands, like Germany, like rich OECD countries where you have established systems. So one question for me is, is there any specific differences in your partnerships that you observe between the more rich and the more poor countries who are still developing? And the follow-up question is, are there any lessons learned that while we would catch up in these more emerging economies, maybe not to follow exactly the way that the rich countries have been doing, but slightly have a different model? Maybe actually it's an inverse learning that we can see in this data governance framework as we go forward. Thank you.
Danielle.
That's a tough one, or tough too. So to your first question, there are differences. I think we're still at the early stages of these partnerships, and unfortunately, the differences mean that we probably have a lot less engagement with some of the global South countries who may not have access to LinkedIn in the same capacity, particularly for, well, one, in terms of their digital enablement, so like internet access, but also how often they're accessing our app and updating it with information. So we do have strict thresholds in terms of coverage for our membership for data that we're even allowed to analyze and interpret to kind of share. So many of those countries, because they're not well represented or don't have coverage through our app or our service, our platform, that just means that we aren't working with them as closely. I think there's a list, if you go to economicgraph.com and look up data for impact, I think that there is a list of the countries that we are working with. And I think that our way around kind of that issue is by working with these larger kind of multinational organizations. But I think there's still a lot of progress that we can make. And to your second question, I do think that there are lessons learned, I don't have concrete lessons learned, but I do think because of the first issue of like not having that engagement or interaction with a wide representation of the full distribution of income countries, that means that we should be more creative and thoughtful and intentional about how do we engage and I guess get to a point of being able to apply data governance principles in different settings with different digital capacities. So I know that isn't promising, but or specific, but I think that's where we are now.
Okay, thank you. And working with the World Bank and the IMF, etc., is also relevant, of course. I saw one other question right here at the front. Is that still valid? Yeah.
Though I know it's a bit related to what Juting of Paris 21 has asked, I'm MacDonald Jojo Budho, Director General, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. I'm impressed by the presentation that we have had in this panel. Mine is actually linked to what Daniele presented and mentioned that private data should supplement but not replace official statistics. Very, very correct. And looking at where the world is moving to, I'm seeing the need to really, as we explore the AI, machine learning and the like, and the big data, it is really important that the private sector, and particularly those that are dealing with the social media, like the LinkedIn, we have big companies like IBM. Do we have a way of really standardizing some of the data privacy requirements so that it can be easy to share out what you have, so that it supplements what the official statistics, what the NSOs are generating? I know we talk of statistics being a public good from the government side, but even for the private sector is also supported by the government. And so if you are to look at it from the point of CSR, then it should also be considered whatever is coming from the private sector could also be given, could also ride under the same arrangement of being public good. And so instead of us struggling so much on how to get this kind of information, could we have some standard way of having the basic requirements such that if we are able to meet such, then it is easier to share out the information or the data that is available for use and in good time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wants to reflect on that? I think we gave it a try in the EU very recently, but it's difficult, of course. Justin.
I would just say, right, you know, the OECD, right, certainly there are groups here, to your point, that have done these kinds of frameworks, but to the prior question, and as you're saying, it's obviously a trickier question when you're dealing with countries that are operating with very different regulatory capacities and cultural contexts, and even how technology is used, right? Like, is this a country where a lot of the tech products and services are coming from a sector based in our country, or are we using it from the next country over, right? All those things kind of affect it, but overall, I certainly do think some of the things that have been mentioned, like minimum thresholds and other concepts, and a lot of this, I say this as not a statistician, a lot of this has come from the statistics space, and I'm a computer scientist, so now sort of our field is taking this up, but there are definitely, you know, practices that work, but to your point, I think figuring out, you know, in kind of an international context, how to tailor that enough where you get a baseline of principles, but you're not too prescriptive where it actually just doesn't work in practice, like we were saying, when you go to make it work in one specific country.
Okay. Well, I think we have to come to an end to this session. Unfortunately, it's 1 o'clock, 1 minute past already. First of all, I'd like to thank all the members of this exquisite panel. Please, a warm applause. Thank you very much. I think we still have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to learn from each other. I think what we saw is that there is a huge variety in the way private companies deal with data, from very good examples to maybe not so good ones. And that is something that is relevant for us in the public sector. The way, I think, like you said, Justin, that the not so good examples set the trust and the way we all have to. So that's affecting the good guys in the private sector as the good guys in the public sector as well. Also, another point, I think, is that risk management and the way we deal with it, also in the public sector, is something that we don't really talk about this in sessions like these, right? But this is something that we have to put on the agenda as well, I think. And there is no silver bullet is one of the quotes that I heard you say quite a lot, and I think we all can agree to that. So thanks very much once again. Enjoy the rest of the day, and it was my pleasure to moderate this session. Thank you so much.